This is Newport, County Mayo, quite attractive with its river, its road bridge and its railway viaduct. And situated on a hill above the town is St. Patrick's Roman Catholic Church. As you can see, its location is quite dramatic. It watches over the town, a spiritual sentinel for all who live here. The church was completed in 1918 and dedicated to St. Patrick. This year it will celebrate its centenary. Christianity, or in this case Roman Catholicism, had many beginnings in this area. And we must go further back in history to see how these traditions evolved and developed, and how they influenced the architecture of this magnificent church. Christianity came to Ireland sometime between 400 and 500 AD. And in every Irish person's mind, St. Patrick and the year 432 are inextricably linked. However, there may have been others before Patrick. Palladius, the bishop, is mentioned. Now, in trying to understand local Christianity, we're come here to Kilmena, where the Coptic Christian saint, Saint Mina, from the western deserts of Egypt, is remembered in the place name, Kilmena. Did he or his followers come here and set up a Coptic Christian church? This early Christian tradition continues with Kiltarnat, just west of Newport. This place was most likely the home of an ascetic or hermit woman, Sarna, and her memory lives on in the townland name. Nearby is St. Birog's Well and an association with sight-related cures. Birog would have been another Christian hermit to live locally. Another two early Christian saints are remembered in the place names St. Marcon and Kilbride, while Brendan the Navigator is said to have visited the parish on his great sea voyage. 12th century reforms to the Irish Church meant that all had changed. Gone was the old Celtic Church, replaced by new monastic orders. And in 1469 the Dominicans came here to Burrishoole, and St. Mary's Friary was constructed at the behest of the de Burgo family of Turlough. The friary was part of a much larger community, a town, a harbour, and an older parish church, all flourished for over 200 years until the friary was garrisoned in Elizabethan times. From the middle of the 16th century onwards, through the Cromwellian Wars and subsequent penal laws, Roman Catholic priests and bishops were exiled, even executed. In effect, Roman Catholicism was driven underground. For this reason, people came to places like O'Hilly's Mass Rock here on the mountainside to hear Mass. There were other mass rocks too, like Glen Hest and on Thurtleave. This was a low point for Roman Catholicism, and yet the people persisted. The penal laws were abandoned, Catholic emancipation was granted, and eventually the Church of Ireland was disestablished. By 1700, the focus had shifted to the new town of Newport, established by Captain Pratt, who leased the lands from the Medlicott family. Originally, there was a Quaker community in the new town. Many of them lived on Medlicott Street. They never had a meeting house of their own, and eventually their community moved away to South Roscommon and then on to Moate in Westmeath. During the 18th century, other Protestant denominations built churches in or near the town. The Methodists in Newport were visited on many occasions by John Wesley, the founder of Methodism. Today, the Catholic Parish Hall stands where the Methodist Church stood. The Presbyterian Church is just a few steps away on the Castlebar Road. There was also a community of Derbyites, a sect similar to the Plymouth Brethren, under the patronage of the O'Donnell landlords. The two major religious communities were the Roman Catholics and the Church of Ireland community. Until the mid-19th century, the Church of Ireland was the established state religion. The Church of Ireland had its first church at Knockavilly Glebe. It is now a ruin. Only the rector's house remains. The last Protestant church was St. Catherine's, situated behind Newport House. It is now a private residence. As a result of the relaxation of the penal laws in the early 18th century, Catholics built their first church in the town. It stood where Kelly's Kitchen restaurant stands today. Apparently a second Catholic church was erected on the main street sometime in the 1770s, and a lintel from that church survives, and that lintel reads, Domus meus, domus orationis. My house, a house of prayer. And this lintel was erected and inserted here in the wall of the church in 1986. Father Michael Gibbons was the priest who built that church in the 1770s. With Catholicism firmly established in the town, Sir Neil O'Donnell granted a site for a new church. This church would be named St. Joseph's. It was completed in 1803. I am sitting here where the altar of St. Joseph's Church once stood. Now this church featured in the prophecy of a 17th century seer, Brian Rua O'Caravan, and he wrote, In years to come, a church will be built on this hill, and the altar will stand where I myself slept. But it will come to pass of that church that not a stone will be left upon a stone. Now this prophecy was fulfilled when it was decided to build a more elaborate and imposing church, St. Patrick's, here behind me. The foundation stone was laid on the 23rd of May 1915, Pentecost Sunday. These are the plans for the new church. And the first thing we notice is the name, St. Joseph's. As we now know, the church was dedicated to St. Patrick. The architect, Butler, regarded these plans as amongst his finest church designs. And so, when he had his portrait painted, he is shown holding a copy of the plans of St. Patrick's. Looking at the plans, we can see that access to the organ loft was originally planned differently. Now, access is by means of a stairs in the south tower. It is clear from the plans that this was a project on a monumental scale, so much so that it was necessary to acquire a field adjacent to the church grounds from the Sisters of Mercy in order to accommodate the project. Now the project would face an even greater challenge: finance. Were it not for the generosity of local businessman Martin Carey, the church may never have been built, for he donated £10,000 for its construction. Martin Carey was born in 1824 in Drumlong townland outside Newport. He was a successful businessman and by the late 19th century had numerous businesses, such as sawmills, corn drying stores, and a shipping agency, as well as a substantial multifaceted store on Main Street. He died in 1909 and therefore did not live to see the church built. John Sisk was the builder of St. Patrick's. The company was from Cork and already had a good reputation for constructing ecclesiastical buildings. Due to the ongoing World War I in Europe, the project suffered a number of setbacks and indeed almost bankrupted the company. The architect was Rudolf Maximilian Butler. He was born in 1872, educated in Germany after his Irish father died. He was responsible for many church buildings, such as St. Cronan's in Ball. He was later appointed Professor of Architecture at University College Dublin. And administering the whole endeavour was Canon Michael MacDonald. Canon MacDonald was parish priest of Burrashool from 1910 until his death in 1940. From the beginning of the works to the consecration of the church, he led the project in consultation with the builder, John Sisk, and the architect, R.M. Butler. He is buried here in the grounds of the church, close to the building that was his crowning achievement. The style of building here is referred to as Hiberno Romanesque, and it carries many of the elements of church building in Ireland. For instance, the door here is reminiscent of that of Clonfert Cathedral in South Galway, originally built in the 6th century. There are 5 arches, and the first arch is decorated with beads and chevrons. The capitals of the pillars are decorated with Celtic motifs and masks. And above the arches is a lightly carved Celtic cross set in a diamond formation. This is the only decoration on the pediment. Not many people realise, but there are 2 round towers attached to St. Patrick's, and they reflect the great monastic tradition of round tower building in Ireland. The bell tower itself is reminiscent of St. Mary's Dominican Friary at Burrashool. Once inside the church, one is immediately taken by its size. Slopes, inclinations, curves and widenings all contribute to this structural style. For instance, here at the western end of the church, it is 1 foot wider than at the eastern end. Likewise, the floor of the nave slopes upwards for 1 foot towards the altar. The columns are also tapered. All these contribute to the illusion of height and length. These building practices reach back to ancient Greece. Here we are in the nave, and if you look up, you can see that the ceiling is barrel vaulted or cylindrical and is composed of fibrous plaster. It has all the appearance of well-dressed stone, whereas the side aisles are vaulted and are in proportion to the 7 arches. Mr. W. Goodyear director of the Brooklyn Museum of Arts and Science, suggested in 1914 that Newport Church was probably the first modern church in Europe in which all of these historic practices were incorporated in one building. If we look carefully, we can see that the architect has used some of the same stylistic features on the outside as he did on the inside walls of the church. Here again, the walls incline from the perpendicular, and he has added dentils to break the uniformity and to create an eye-catching diversity. At the south doorway, we can see the architect's appreciation for medieval carved corbels, here represented by two stone heads. The coping stones used in the parapet are granite and limestone from Dublin and Cork respectively. A different, finer red sandstone was used for the doorways and capitals. A checkered pattern has been achieved in the parapet walls by using alternatively red sandstone and a cream sandstone from Ball. A short string course separates the patterned stone from the row of dentils below. The tower is divided by 4 string courses set at diminishing heights. Immediately below the first string course are 3 blind arcades on each side of the pediment. Directly above this course are 3 slender semicircular windows. A single slit window is set in the centre above the second course on each face. 5 louvered windows ornament each wall of the tower above the third course. The bell is housed in this section. The fourth course is a short distance from the parapet. The church bell is housed here in the tower above the west doorway. Church bells were introduced around the year 400 AD and finally approved by the Pope in the year 600. Interestingly, it was Irish missionaries who popularised the use of church bells in Northern Europe. Before them, the Greeks used a flat plate of metal to summon people to services. The bell itself weighs 42 hundredweight, over 2,000 kilos, among the heaviest in Connacht. It was donated as a memorial to Martin Carey and his wife by their niece, Ellen Lavelle. The stone is red sandstone, found in abundance to the west as far as the Curran Peninsula. Surprisingly, no one can say for certain where the actual quarries are, from whence the stone was taken. Apparently, a Mr. James Wynne suggested the local source for the red stone. Various theories abound. Curran would be the limit in terms of distance. Other possibilities are somewhere in the Callowbrack or Clonfoher or Coolmore areas, where the stone is literally lying on the surface. There are no distinctive quarries to be found and no records as far as we can see. The layout and design of Christian churches has a long and complex history, from the early house churches to modern basilicas and cathedrals. St. Patrick's is rectangular in shape with a sacristy added on the south side. Parish churches are usually composed of a western entrance, a nave and side aisles that lead to a chancel or sanctuary at the eastern end. The sanctuary, chancel or choir was reserved for the clergy and typically separated from the nave by steps or altar rails, as in the case of St. Patrick's. 2 rood screens separate the side altars from the main altar. In medieval times, the rood screen divided the nave from the chancel of the church, therefore creating an air of mystery because the laity could only hear the Latin intonation of the Mass and see the priest raise the chalice at the consecration. One wonders if the change from Latin to English and the removal of rood screens took away some of that mystery. The altar is the one part of the church that has changed from its original configuration. The altar as it was in 1918 was donated by Martin Carey to the old St. Joseph's Church and was simply reinstalled in the new St. Patrick's. Before the Second Vatican Council, the priest said Mass with his back to the congregation and in Latin. As a result of the deliberations of the Council in the 1960s, the altar table was turned to face the congregation and many of its elements were removed. The present altar table was constructed from slabs of white marble and columns of the coloured marble from the demolished pulpit. Parishioners were not happy with the structural changes and exerted pressure on the clergy to restore some parts of the altar. For instance, the reclining Christ was returned to a central position on the main altar. The tabernacle on the main altar survived the 1973 changes, as did the candlesticks and crucifix. They were specially designed to harmonise with the architecture of the church, and they blend in nicely. The four statues on the back of the altar represent Matthew, Mark, Luke and John, the four evangelists. It is worth noting that the Sacred Heart altar here was donated by the men's sodality. Sodalities were composed of either women or men, and each sodality had its own directives. They would meet after Mass on a Sunday. Sodalities began in the Middle Ages. This altar is composed of many different marbles, mostly Irish in origin: Connemara, Cork, Castleisland and Moat. The tabernacle door is modelled on St. Patrick's Bell, now in the National Museum. Notice the shaping of the tabernacle door and the side doors to the church. They all demonstrate the same shape as the early Christian door at Gallerus on the Dingle Peninsula in Kerry. This is really good design work, following ancient architectural styles into a modern setting. The Lady Altar was taken from the old St. Joseph's Church, and this altar is now the baptistry. The baptistry was once in the southwest corner of the church and had a canopy that could be raised or lowered as required. Again, in keeping with early Christian tradition, the grey limestone font was octagonal in shape. Eight-sided fonts recall the eighth day, the first day of resurrection. St. Augustine wrote, "The day of the Lord, an everlasting eighth day." St. Ambrose concurred, because on the eighth day, by rising, Christ loosens the bondage of death and receives the dead from their graves. And so, a simple artefact can have such symbolism. St. Patrick's font has the added simplicity of Celtic design. In 1973, it was transferred to the Lady Chapel. The marble used in the communion rails is Irish, Connemara green and Cork red, while the capitals are limestone and have different Celtic designs carved on them. Cork red marble is used for the top and the cornice. These gates are made of solid bronze using Celtic designs and are plated with silvered metal. Today they would cost around €21,000. Patrick Walsh, who inherited the Martin Carey businesses, donated the money for them. During the renovations of 1973, candelabra and tapestry hangings were removed from the three altars, as was the pulpit that stood in this area. There are two confession boxes, or properly called confessionals. The Celtic cross motif from the west door is repeated over the centre doors. While official church publications usually refer to the sacrament of penance, reconciliation, or penance and reconciliation, many lay people continue to use the term confession in reference to the sacrament. The practice of using confessionals in the modern form dates back to the 16th century. Stations of the Cross originated in pilgrimages to the Holy Land. Christians wished to reproduce the journey of Jesus from Pilate's judgment hall to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, and they accorded this route the title the Via Dolorosa. And in 1731, Pope Clement XII fixed the number of stations at 14. Now, in relation to the stations here in St. Patrick's, they cost £68 and 10 shillings to mount in 1918. A number of pictures adorn the west end of the church. The two on the organ gallery are copies of Murillo's Assumption. That one dates from 1670, and the original is in the Hermitage Museum in St. Petersburg in Russia. The other painting is Franch's The Good Shepherd. These were painted by a local artist, James O'Malley of the Royal Hibernian Academy. He was born in Newport in 1816. His father Patrick was a farmer and shopkeeper. He died in Derren Taggart in 1888. The picture over the north door is another by Murillo, a copy of Madonna and Child, originally copied by Luigi Teste in 1853. This is another interesting picture, a copy of Our Lady of Perpetual Succour, a 13th or 14th century Byzantine painting, which is housed in the Redemptorist Church of St. Alphonsus in Rome. Canon Killeen acquired this copy in Rome in the 1950s. Another feature of the church is the organ and the organ gallery. The gallery itself is octagonal in shape, and this design is found elsewhere in the church. Now, organs have a long and honourable history in churches. Initially, Christianity rejected musical instruments. The pipe organ has its origins in the Greek water organ, in which water provided the pressure which produced the wind for the organ. From the 12th century on, organs became much more complex. This organ here was created by Alex Chestnut of Waterford, and it has 1,006 pipes. And one interesting thing to note is that the organ and the church bell are both tuned to the same pitch. The sanctuary lamp once belonged to the older St. Joseph's Church. It dates from the 1850s. It hangs at a point where the chancel and nave meet. The supporting chain from the roof is a representation of a rosary beads. Behind the altar is one of the most magnificent pieces of stained glass work by the renowned Irish stained glass artist Harry Clarke. However, these were not the first stained glass windows in the church. The first windows were made by Sarah Purser. She was the first female member of the Royal Hibernian Academy. In March 1931, the last judgment window by Harry Clarke was installed. It had been commissioned by Canon MacDonald, the parish priest. The canon redeemed his own life insurance policy to pay the £800 sterling. In today's terms, we are talking of over €2 million for these windows. In fact, this window was the last work of Harry Clarke himself. He died before it was installed. There are 3 lights in the window, each of equal size. The centre light shows Christ raised on Judgment Day. At his feet there is an angel blowing the final trumpet, and on either side of him angels are writing the names of the saved. The earth is shown as a globe, with the shapes of the dead wending their way towards judgment. The damned are shown on the window to the left of Christ, and included among them is a portrait of Harry himself. St. Patrick dominates this light with 6 apostles. The light on Christ's right shows the saved with his mother seated. This is a major work of art, both spiritual and earthly. Nothing remains to be said. We can only marvel at it. In contrast to the Harry Clarke windows is the two-light window in the north wall of the Sacred Heart Chapel, portraying resurrection scene. By 1971, 2 more Harry Clarke windows were inserted in the side chapels. The new windows were commissioned by the old IRA in memory of General Michael Kilroy. The Lady Chapel scene depicts the Nativity, while the Sacred Heart Chapel depicts the agony in the garden. Two further windows reflect the O'Donnell connection. These windows are in the south wall of the nave. They commemorate Lady O'Donnell and her husband George. They are buried outside in the church grounds. Originally, these windows had been donated to the Convent of Mercy by the O'Donnells. History had returned the O'Donnell family to the folds of the Catholic Church after 150 years. Who were the craftsmen, the stonemasons, the carpenters, the wood turners, the plasterers, the marble sculptors who worked here? No records of their names exist, and yet we can be assured that they emerged from a tradition of church building that stretched back to the great medieval cathedrals, and further still to the iconic building styles of Greece and Rome. This is no mere copy of another church. This is a unique building, a blending of over 2,000 years of style and imagination. It is a gateway, a portal to profound spiritual possibilities, a coming together of the rational and the emotional. So, there you have it. The Church of St. Patrick on Barrack Hill, built at a time of great upheaval. It is a testament to Martin Carey, to R.M. Butler, the architect, to John Sisk, the builder, to the churchmen who sanctioned it, but most especially to the local people who gave their time, their horses and carts, and their hard-earned shillings so that it all might come to pass.